She stood in my driveway, arms crossed, face red with rage, not because I did something wrong, but because I dared to park inside my own garage. The HOA president, a woman everyone in the neighborhood called Karen, behind her back, didn't like that I used my property without her permission. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights filled the cabin's peaceful yard, and officers questioned me like a criminal in front of my own home. That's when I made a silent promise. If she wanted to play games, I'd show her exactly how far I could go. The next morning, I locked everything tight, canceled my meetings, and left town. For the next 7 days, the HOA would find out exactly how useless they were without access to the one place they loved to abuse, my garage. And that was just the beginning. The first time I saw her, she was measuring my grass with a ruler. I thought it was a joke, but no. She stood there in her beige slacks and pastel sweater, crouched down with absolute focus, muttering something about HOA standards. I should have known then what I was dealing with. Karen, real name Deborah, but no one dared call her that, was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, a tyrant cloaked in neighborhood rules and self-righteousness. I bought the cabin for peace. 4 weekends away from the chaos of the city, it wasn't much, just a cozy place near the woods, with a small garage I used for my truck and tools. The kind of place where you breathe deeper, sleep better, and remember what quiet sounds like. But peace is hard to hold on to when someone watches your every move. It started small. Notes on my door about the approved paint color. Warnings about excess noise when I played music while working on the porch. I tried to be patient. I nodded politely when she talked, smiled through her fake concern. I figured it was easier to let her feel in control. But Karen didn't want control. She wanted obedience. That weekend, I arrived at the cabin late Friday night, truck loaded with supplies. I had been planning to spend a few days there, get some work done on the deck, maybe go fishing. It had been a long week. I pulled into the driveway, garage door clicking open, and parked inside like I always did. Closed it behind me. Lights off. Peace. Next morning, sunlight filtered through the trees as I drank coffee on the porch. Birds chirping, air cool and crisp. That's when I heard the sharp clack of heels on the gravel. I turned. There she was, storming up the path like she owned the land beneath her feet. "You can't park in there," she snapped, skipping any greeting. I blinked. In my garage? She held up a clipboard like it was a badge. According to Section 8, Paragraph C of the HOA Charter, garages are for storage purposes only. Parking vehicles inside is a violation. I actually laughed. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I've warned you before about non-compliance. This is your final notice." I stepped down off the porch, anger rising. "Karen, it's my garage. I bought this property, paid for it. My name's on every document." Her lips curled into a smug smile. "Yes, and you agreed to the HOA bylaws when you signed. If you won't respect the rules, we'll take appropriate action." Before I could reply, she turned and stomped away, pulling her phone from her purse. I thought that was the end of it, just another empty threat. I was wrong. An hour later, while I was cutting wood out back, I heard the sound of engines, not just one, but 2 patrol cars pulling into my drive. I wiped my hands, walked around front, and saw Karen standing with the officers, pointing at the garage like it was a crime scene. "There he is," she said. "He's refusing to comply. It's a violation of the HOA code, and I don't feel safe." The officer approached, clearly annoyed. "Sir, can we talk?" I kept my cool, even though my heart pounded. "Sure, what's the problem?" "She claims you're violating a community agreement regarding garage use." I stared at him, trying not to laugh. "You called the cops because I parked in my garage." Karen interrupted loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "It's a pattern of behavior, officer, aggression, disrespect for authority. I've had enough." The officer sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, we're not here to arrest anyone, but we'd appreciate if you could cooperate, just to keep the peace." I stared at Karen, then at the officers. In that moment, something inside me clicked. This wasn't just about a garage. It was about control, hers over me, and if I let her win now, she'd never stop. I nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll take care of it." Karen smiled again, smug and victorious. But I wasn't done. That night, I sat in the dark, thinking I could fight her with legal action, call a lawyer, sue the HOA, but that would take time. I wanted something immediate, something she'd feel. The next morning, before sunrise, I packed a bag, locked the garage tight, turned off the cabin's utilities, and left a note on the door. "Vacation. Back in a week." I drove away, heart light for the first time in months. Let her stew. Let her call her meetings, write her violation notices. With the garage sealed and no one to push around, Karen would finally have to face the one thing she couldn't control: being ignored. I wasn't just leaving, I was reclaiming my peace, and something told me, by the time I got back, everything would change. The first day I was gone, my phone stayed silent. No texts, no calls, just the kind of silence you get when someone's plotting their next move. I resisted the urge to check in. I knew Karen too well. She thrived on attention, and silence was the one thing she couldn't stand. By the second day, the calls started. Unknown numbers, voicemail notifications stacking up. I didn't listen. I was sitting by a lake, miles from the cabin, watching the water ripple under a golden sky. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. But back home, Karen was unraveling. According to a neighbor, Mike, who I trusted, she showed up 3 times that Monday, walked around the cabin, clipboard in hand, knocking on the door like she expected it to open just because she was there. When it didn't, she peered through windows, checked the locks on the garage, even tried to open the gate to the backyard. Locked. Everything locked. She left, but not before taping a bright orange HOA violation notice on the door. Mike snapped a picture and sent it to me with a simple message: she's losing it. By the 3rd day, Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting right there in the middle of the street, under the hot afternoon sun. Folding chairs, a table, even a little podium she must have dragged from home. 6 board members sat in awkward silence as Karen ranted about non-compliance and the importance of setting an example. What she didn't expect was the crowd. Half the neighborhood came out, most of them curious, some just bored. Mike stood at the edge of the group, watching. He said later that Karen's voice got shrill, her points more absurd by the minute. He's abandoning the property, she shouted. He's hiding from responsibility. It's a safety hazard, and we need to take action immediately. Someone asked what action she had in mind. That's when things took a turn. Karen pulled out a stack of papers, a petition. We're initiating a motion to fine him daily for non-compliance and restricted access. Additionally, I'm proposing we revoke his HOA privileges. Mike told me a few neighbors laughed out loud. Privileges. Someone said, it's a cabin, not a country club. Still, Karen was undeterred. She had signatures, maybe half a dozen. Enough to feel powerful, not enough to matter. But she wasn't done. That night she called the cops again. This time, Mike caught it all on video. Karen, standing on my porch, arms waving as she argued with 2 very tired-looking officers. She claimed I had abandoned the property and that the locked garage was suspicious. She even suggested they should force entry to make sure nothing illegal was going on inside. The officers refused. One of them, Officer Daniels, I recognized him, told her bluntly, "Ma'am, this is not an emergency. If the owner isn't here and there's no sign of a crime, we can't do anything." Karen's face turned a shade of red I didn't know was possible. She tried to argue, but the officers walked back to their car and left her standing there alone, clutching her clipboard like it could save her. By the 5th day, the HOA clubhouse had become her war room. She was calling in favors, trying to contact county inspectors, even looking into filing a formal complaint with the zoning office. But here's the thing, none of her claims held up. I wasn't breaking any real laws. And locking your garage, not a crime? She was losing ground. Fast? Mike kept me updated. He said neighbors were starting to talk. Really talk, not just whispers behind closed doors, but loud, open conversations. People who'd never questioned the HOA before were now questioning everything. Why were their dues going up? Why did Karen care more about a garage than the broken streetlights no one fixed? Why did they let her bully them? On day 6, someone started a petition, not Karen, but a neighbor named Lucy. It called for a vote to remove Karen as HOA president. By noon, half the neighborhood had signed. Karen found out that evening. She went door to door, trying to talk people out of it, pleading, threatening, but it was too late. The power she held, all of it, was built on fear. And when people stop being afraid, that power disappears. I came back on day 7, pulled into the drive just before sunset. Everything looked peaceful, untouched. The orange violation notice still clung to the door, flapping gently in the breeze. I peeled it off and smiled. Inside, the air was cool, quiet. I unpacked, poured a drink, and stepped onto the porch. That's when I saw her, Karen, standing across the street, staring at me like I was a ghost. I raised my glass, nodded once, and walked back inside. She didn't follow. She couldn't. The tide had turned, and for the first time, Karen knew it wasn't her neighborhood anymore. The morning after I returned, the air felt different, not just because it was cooler, or because the birds seemed louder. It was something else, a quiet tension, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. I opened the garage, slow and deliberate, letting the sunlight stream in. The truck was right where I left it, untouched. Just the way I wanted Karen to see it. I didn't need to look across the street. I could feel her watching. Within the hour, Mike was on my porch with coffee and a grin on his face. "Welcome back, man," he said, handing me a cup. "You missed quite a show." He gave me the full rundown. After the failed police visit and the petition to remove her, Karen had doubled down. She started patrolling the neighborhood daily, clipboard, sunglasses, walking as if she was on duty. But people weren't listening anymore. Doors that once opened for her stayed shut. Conversations stopped when she passed. Her kingdom was crumbling, and she knew it. "What about the petition?" I asked. Mike's smile widened. 70 signatures. That's more than enough for a recall vote. It's happening next week. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Good still. I knew Karen wouldn't go down without one last desperate move. By noon, she came marching up my path. No clipboard this time, just a manila envelope clutched tight in her hand, her jaw clenched, eyes burning. I stayed on the porch, calm, watching her approach like a storm I had already weathered. "I need to speak with you," she said sharply. "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied, voice level. "This is serious," she insisted, holding out the envelope. "The HOA board has voted to fine you daily for failure to comply with our garage policy. This is a formal notice." I didn't take the envelope. I was gone for a week, Karen, I said, not hiding, not running, just gone. "And during that time, you trespassed, harassed neighbors, and called the cops again, because you didn't like the way I used my own property. You signed an agreement," she snapped. "And you're in violation of." I stood up, .com, but firm. "I signed an agreement, yes, one that doesn't give you the right to invade my space or dictate where I park. I've reviewed every line of that HOA charter. There's nothing that prohibits parking in a garage. This fine? It's void, just like your authority." Her face twisted, lips trembling as she tried to form a comeback. "But she had nothing. You've lost control, Karen," I said quietly. "And it's not just me. Everyone sees it now." She dropped the envelope at my feet. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Then she turned and walked away. Faster than she came, her footsteps hard and erratic. I didn't pick up the envelope. Mike came by later and found it still there, slightly damp from the dewdrop by midweek. Things escalated further, but not in Karen's favor. The HOA held an open forum for residents, something Karen never allowed before. Without her approval, 3 board members organized it in the park. Fold-out chairs, tables, a microphone, and a crowd. More than half the neighborhood showed up. I stood near the back, quiet, just listening. People took turns speaking. Some complained about the constant fines, the invasive inspections, the lack of transparency with HOA funds. Others shared stories, how Karen embarrassed them for lawn decorations, how she shut down kids' lemonade stands, how she threatened to tow a neighbor's car for being parked slightly crooked. Then someone mentioned me. A woman named Angela stepped forward. "He parked in his garage. That's it." And she called the police. Twice. This isn't about rules, it's about control. And I think we've all had enough. Applause broke out, loud and sustained. Karen wasn't there. She didn't show. Maybe she knew what was coming. 2 days later, the official recall vote was held at the clubhouse, the same place Karen once ruled like a queen. I arrived early, watched people file in, most of them smiling, greeting each other like neighbors again, not subjects under watch. The vote was swift, 92-21 in favor of removal. Just like that, Karen was done. When the results were announced, there was no celebration, no gloating, just relief. People shook hands, talked freely, made plans to repair the broken streetlights, to clean up the park, to start over. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, I saw a moving truck in Karen's driveway. She was out front, directing 2 men as they loaded boxes into the back. Her face was pale, expression blank. She didn't look at me, didn't speak. Mike stood beside me watching. "Looks like she's leaving." I nodded slowly. She finally realized she can't control people forever. As the truck pulled away, Karen and her car behind it, I stepped into my garage, turned on the light, and smiled. Peace wasn't just possible, it was mine again. The sound of her car pulling away was the last echo of her reign. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, I stood in my garage, the same space that had sparked her meltdown. There was something poetic about it, the place she tried so hard to control becoming the symbol of her downfall. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. What I felt was something deeper. Peace, maybe, but also the satisfaction of knowing I stood my ground and reclaimed what was mine. Over the next few days, the neighborhood felt lighter. Kids played in front yards again. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved, stopped for conversations, shared stories about Karen's most absurd rules. There was laughter where tension had lived. For the first time, it felt like a community, not a dictatorship. I didn't expect what came next. On Saturday morning, the new acting HOA president, a quiet guy named Rick, knocked on my door. I opened it to find him standing there with a hesitant smile and a folder in hand. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "For standing up," he replied. "You did what most of us were too, afraid to do, and we found something, thought you should see it." He handed me the folder and stepped back, giving me space. Inside were documents, HOA meeting records, financial statements, emails. I flipped through them, confusion turning to disbelief. Karen had been fining residents far beyond what the charter allowed. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars in penalties for imaginary violations. And worse, she had been funneling those fines into a separate account, one not reported in the HOA's public financial statements. Rick shook his head. "She hid it well. But after the recall, we started digging. We've already contacted an attorney. There's going to be an investigation." I stared at the papers, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. She hadn't just harassed people, she'd stolen from them. from us. She could face charges, I said. Rick nodded. We hope so. But in the meantime, we're refunding everyone she'll find, including you. He pulled out a check, a refund of every fine she'd ever hit me with. It wasn't a fortune, but it felt like justice. I thanked him, shook his hand, and watched him leave, feeling like a weight had lifted off my chest. Later that day, the neighborhood held a barbecue, the first one in years. People brought food, kids ran wild, music played from someone's porch. It was simple, but it meant something. We were finally free from the grip Karen had held for too long. As the sun set, I found myself surrounded by people who, just weeks ago, were strangers. Mike raised a glass, tapping it with a fork for attention. I think we owe someone a drink, he said loudly, pointing at me. Laughter and applause followed, and I held up my own glass. Shaking my head, I didn't do much, I said. Just parked my truck? Everyone laughed again, but they knew it was more than that. I hadn't just parked, I'd stood firm, refused to be bullied, and quietly dismantled the power Karen had abused. The best part? She had humiliated herself. I hadn't needed to raise my voice or cause a scene. Her need for control, her obsession with power, it had destroyed her from the inside out. And everyone saw it later that night. After the crowd thinned and the stars filled the sky, I sat on my porch, watching the woods sway in the breeze. Mike joined me with 2 beers, handing me one. You think she'll ever come back? He asked. I shook my head. Not after this. She's finished. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels earned. Then he chuckled. No. This all started because of your garage. I smiled. Yeah. Funny, isn't it? She thought she owned this place, every inch of it, but it was never about the garage. Mike nodded slowly. It was about control. Exactly, I said. And when you take that away from someone like her, there's nothing left. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly still. Peace wasn't just the absence of conflict. It was knowing you'd fought for what mattered and won without losing yourself in the fight. The cabin was quiet again. My garage was open, and for the first time since I bought this place, I felt truly at home. If you enjoyed this story of standing your ground and turning the tables, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe for more powerful stories just like this one. And if you've ever had a wild HOA experience or power move of your own, drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.